Chapter 7. The Seventh Law of Zero. Transportation. Although the enthusiasm for autonomous vehicles, AVs, took a hit for a couple of years, they're a really hard problem. Momentum is building again, and the multitude of startups and brilliant scientists tackling the issues make us confident the future perfect will include an unlimited number of fully autonomous vehicles. The implications are mind-boggling. The cost of driving, in terms of the time you devote to it, will essentially disappear once we reach full autonomy. With time no longer a factor, distance won't be one either. Even if you have to travel a couple of 100 miles or spend 2 to 3 hours in a vehicle, you'll take your world, your phone, computer, and VR goggles, into the vehicle with you, and connect just as you would sitting on your couch at home or your desk at the office. Now, a lot of metal will need to be shaped and maintained, even in an autonomous future, so transportation won't be free. The power for the cars won't be free either, but it should cost much less than it does today, because all cars will be electric, and energy prices will benefit from that law of zero. Still, all in all, the costs of transportation will be so much lower than they are today that we can be profligate in throwing transportation resources at anything we want to design for the future perfect. You won't need to go get things, they'll come to you. That ingredient you forgot for a dinner dish, or for that matter, the dinner itself, just summon it. You'll pay a monthly fee to be part of the circuit for those who, like you, forget things. But you won't need to spend 20 minutes on a trip. More if you have to wrestle small kids into the car with you. Everything you'll need will come based on a sort of Amazon Prime to the nth degree. You won't need to take your kids to soccer practice. The cars will do it, only opening their doors once a coach or other designated adult has acknowledged the kids are accounted for. The elderly parent whose keys you've had to take away, or the physically challenged relative who can't drive? No problem. That person can now get around just like anyone else. Autonomous drones will kick in too. They'll not only drop off packages at your doorstep, but will provide emergency help. Imagine drones stationed throughout neighborhoods that could do CPR or administer naloxone to someone suffering from an opioid overdose. Or imagine drones that could deliver a flotation device to someone adrift at sea, provide food, water, and medical supplies to someone lost in the mountains, or airlift out individuals trapped by a wildfire or flood. You may even get that flying car we've all been hearing about for decades. You still won't be George or Jane Jetson and be able to bebop anywhere. Helicopter-like flying cars are mechanically probably too tricky to be deployed widely, and car/planes require runways for taking off and landing, even if you can figure out what to do about the wings as the car/plane drives down the highway. But the airways should certainly open up to new forms of passenger traffic. The limitations of flying cars up to this point have really been a computing problem. It's so hard to keep track of all those objects in the air that major airlines still fly primarily via the equivalent of freeways that crisscross in the sky, rather than just going straight from the starting point to the landing spot. But the law of zero for computing means we'll have orders of magnitude more computing power and can manage far more objects in the sky without them running into each other. And you have a lot more room for vehicles when you're working in 3 dimensions rather than 2. There's also no need to pour concrete to create those routes in the sky. The law of zero for transportation means you could very well take an AV to a local airport in the Bay Area, catch a flying car for the half-hour flight to Truckee, California, and have an AV take you to the resort where you're staying in Lake Tahoe, avoiding what today could be 2 hours sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the San Mateo Bridge over the San Francisco Bay on a Friday afternoon in winter, followed by a potential slog through a snowstorm as you climb into the mountains. Sometimes, nothing will even have to move in the future perfect. While virtual reality has had its fits and starts over the past 25 years, it will have so much more computing power and bandwidth that it will let you drop in to some situations without ever having to leave your home or office. And the pandemic greatly accelerated remote work, both in terms of the technology and in terms of general acceptance. All these changes will be phased in, of course. The dangers of having a drone drop something on you from 150 feet in the air, for instance, are great enough that restrictions will be severe until the technology really proves itself. Never mind the restrictions that will govern autonomous planes filled with people. But the changes will happen soon enough that they can be assumed for a future perfect world. So much will change about transportation, time, and distance that the interactions are hard to project with certainty. But don't be lulled into complacency. Changes that may seem like simple linear improvements can produce decidedly nonlinear effects. Consider an example as unsexy as the Erie Canal, known as Clinton's Big Ditch, or even Clinton's Folly, after the New York governor who championed it in the early 1800s. All the canal did was provide a faster connection between Buffalo and Albany once it was completed in 1825. Travel time over the 363 miles dropped from 45 days by wagon to 9 days by barge. Still a long trip, but a lot less long. The cost of cargo declined 99.5% because a team of 2 mules, which could pull a wagon carrying about 500 pounds, could pull a barge laden with 100,000 pounds of cargo. But the changes the canal caused stretched far beyond what those improvements would suggest. Boomtowns exploded along the canal, including at Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany, that grew into major cities. Even more important was that having the canal connect the Great Lakes port of Buffalo to the Hudson River port of Albany by water, 150 miles upriver from New York City, opened the interior of the continent up to settlement and transformed New York City into a dominant port and a world commercial center. All because of a ditch. We've seen new forms of transportation cause tectonic shifts repeatedly. James Watt's dramatic improvement to the steam engine enabled the river steamboats, steam-driven trains, and ocean steamships that drove expansion, integration, and global trade throughout the 19th century. The car, initially seen as merely a better version of a horse, reshaped cities and created suburbs. The internal combustion engine that powered those early cars also produced trucks and, enabled by the interstate highway system, reshaped commerce and just about everything else about how we live, work, and play. The jet engine enabled planes that shrank world travel into a day. Forget about getting from Buffalo to Albany in 9 days. You can get from Buffalo to Moscow in 9 hours. AVs will provide the next such step change in transportation and will transform how we live and work. We can already see that vast amounts of space will open up in cities, where nearly a third of space is devoted to parking cars that will no longer need to be parked. Cars will just drop people off and then move on to their next user or head to a waiting area. In the U.S., there are 2 billion parking spaces for 275 million cars, or more than 7 for every vehicle. So doing away with parking areas will provide lots of flexibility to redesign public spaces. We suspect that lots more people will live in cities because they're efficient and because they'll become much more attractive once you get rid of parking spaces and the noise and air pollution that come with vehicles using internal combustion engines. Still, others will take advantage of their newly free time and distance and live near that lake in the country, knowing they can get to a city anytime they want, with zero inconvenience. Cars, buses, trolleys, and subways shaped the urban and suburban landscape a century ago, making cities more attractive by getting rid of the steaming piles of horse manure that built up on every corner and allowing for suburbs to thrive too. Similarly, AVs will create forces that impel new shifts, including many that aren't immediately obvious, but that will develop as AVs remove design constraints and as brilliant imaginations run free. Yes, lots of people and businesses will have to adapt. Most notable are the 4.5 million professional drivers in the U.S., whom we firmly believe will have ample opportunities for new employment, though we acknowledge the transition will be painful for many. Autonomous vehicles will also change emergency rooms. They currently treat some 2.5 million people each year related to auto accidents, and, based on current estimates, might treat only 10% as many once AVs become ubiquitous. Car insurance will essentially go away. Why do you need insurance when there are almost no accidents, and you aren't driving anyway? Police departments won't need patrols on the road watching for misdeeds by drivers, and so on. On the other side of all that adaptation, we know that health, wealth, education, economic mobility, and more will all improve, because access to resources currently constrains so many people, and the law of zero for transportation means those limitations will disappear in the future perfect. We also know that women won't have to worry about being attacked by a driver, as there won't be one, and that the vast majority of the roughly 40,000 people who die on U.S. roads every year will miss that appointment with death and will keep living full lives. Drawing on all 7 of the laws of zero will now let us start to design the future we want, pulling from both our research and from the thinking of some awfully smart friends we've worked with over the years. Based on the laws of zero and other likely advances in technology, in the next section we'll explore key areas where we think we can collectively design wonderful, yet plausible, futures. We'll also introduce you to the key tool, called a future history, that we use and that we will, at the end of the book, turn over to you, so you can start to fill in the many blanks. As we've said, not all these laws of zero will kick in right away. The laws will all evolve within today's reality, and will require time to supplant it. For instance, the fleet of cars on the road typically takes about 15 years to turn over. So even if autonomous vehicle technology were perfect tomorrow, people wouldn't just throw away their current cars and switch over to AVs. And AVs certainly won't be perfect tomorrow. But we still think the core question here is a fascinating and important one. How will these laws of zero and other assorted developments let us design as grand a world as possible for our kids and for their kids in 2050? What can removing today's actual and cognitive restraints let us realistically project for them? The short answer is a lot. The longer answer follows.